All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. As you all probably know, this is our last webinar in our professional job search series. The two previous webinars focusing on cover letters and resumes, as well as a webinar focusing on applying online and succeeding in an interview. Both of those are up on our YouTube channel. Just search tutor.com at YouTube, and you'll be able to find all of those videos. So if you ever need to go back and kind of get a refresher, you can. Now for today's session, this is going to be a special, as you can see, Q&A session where you are able to submit any of your questions that you may have that maybe you've come across on your job seeking journey and you wanted a little bit more information. Or if there was something that we covered previously that you'd like to get some more clarification on, you can let us know and we'd love to take care of that and answer those questions for you. Before we get started, in order to actually do any of this, you would have to submit a question through the question box, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen, attached to your control panel. So feel free at any point in time to submit those questions, and we would be more than happy to get to them. Also attached to your control panel are your audio settings, so you can change where the audio is coming out of. And if you ever have any issues, definitely play around with that first, or you can always let me know via the question box and I'll be able to help troubleshoot with you. Now, back to the actual presentation. As you all probably know at this point, my name is Marcus Nebro. I'm a client services specialist over at Tutor.com, who primarily works with our library partners. And over the past year, and especially in the past couple of months, when talking to librarians, one of the biggest focuses and concerns that they have for their communities happen to be around their job seekers, because it's no surprise that this past year has been very interesting and difficult for a lot of people, whether they're jumping in for the first time or forced to come back into the job market after years of having a position. So we wanted to leverage our experts and kind of make life a little bit easier for you. So we decided to hold these series. Now, our presenter is Rachel Eckman. She works on our quality assurance team, and she also happens to have years of experience running resume workshops and kind of doing all of this career coaching. So I'd love to introduce her and we can go ahead and get started. Take it away, Rachel.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you all for joining us again. And I hope that this Q&A session proves to be just the absolute, thing that you've been waiting for to get started on a really successful and positive job search. And I am thrilled to be here as always. And I know that Marcus gave me a wonderful introduction, but just to give you guys a little background information on myself, I am actually a mechanic, or was for quite a while. And I retired from the tech world in about 2015 to go into education full time. But I have been a teacher and a tutor and a counselor in some capacity or another for the last 20 years or so. And I just love doing these job search webinars, and I love doing job search presentations, anything to do with resumes and applications and going on job interviews, because it really is just one of the most important experiences of our lives, right? It's one of the things that's going to determine the outcome of our job search, which is going to affect us every day for a third of our lives. So I'm thrilled to be doing this with you guys, and I hope that you get some really great information today. I wanted to start with a little bit. I know this is a predominantly Q&A session, but I wanted to start with a little bit about LinkedIn, because one of the things that Marcus and I have discussed is that we've gotten a lot of requests for a little more information about LinkedIn. So I want to talk to you guys about just really quickly about how to create a highly effective LinkedIn profile. One of the things that we covered in the presentation earlier this week about the application and interview process was establishing a great professional networking profile. And LinkedIn is really just the best place to do that. And it is the site where 90% of recruiters are looking for potential candidates. And it's just a wonderful way to establish a professional network and to get yourself visible by recruiters and employers on a really, really important level. And so the thing that I had discussed on the job application website, or excuse me, presentation, was that on the LinkedIn website, there is an option, and it's shown here on the screen. I've got it circled right there, that says show recruiters you're open to work. When you click get started on that button, and this is something that you're going to do, again, to reiterate from last time, you're going to first get your LinkedIn profile 100% sharp and presentable and matching your resume, because the minute you get started, the minute you click on that button, it's going to make your profile visible. And you only get one shot with these recruiters. They're not going to double back to see if you've done any updates. So you want to make sure that what they're going to see when you become visible is what you want them to see. So first, get your profile in order. What do I mean by that? Get yourself a really nice, plain, professional looking headshot. And I don't mean go and pay somebody to take a headshot photo of you. I just mean utilize a photo and crop it in a way that it's really more of just a head, maybe chest up kind of shot. Typically, my recommendation is to see very little, if any, clothing. In other words, really just like shoulders up, we're talking about, so that it's just have a nice smile on there, no duck faces or any kind of crazy looks. And just make sure that it just presents you in a really professional manner. The other thing that you want to make sure, and we've discussed this as well, is just to align your LinkedIn profile with your resume completely as much as possible. Now, you want to avoid copying and pasting directly from your resume into your LinkedIn, only because really it just looks lazy. And then it's completely redundant. But the summary is where I recommend taking a little bit more of a liberty, right? So in your summary on LinkedIn, you can be a little more personal. I don't recommend writing your summary in resume language. So all the summaries and all the stuff that's in your resume is written in resume language, but the summary on your LinkedIn profile can use the word I, and it can have a lot of more soft skills involved in it, some personality traits, characteristics, even some professionally driven hobbies or outside activities or professional development activities that you engage in are a good thing to put on there. But just again, make sure it's completely professional, but you can get a little bit more relaxed with the format in your summary on your LinkedIn page. And so it can be a little bit longer. Of course, you're not like relegated to that 3 to 4 sentence restriction as you are on your resume. And then make sure you get all the things on your profile squared away before you click this recruiter button. Once that happens, it's going to give you a couple of options to customize. Once you say, okay, let's get started, it's going to say, well, tell us what kind of work you're open to. And then you're going to have options of job titles, and it may even suggest some job titles to you based on your current or previous positions. And you're going to make sure you can use as many job titles as you can. Try to be general so that you're open to as many potential recruiters as possible. And then again, with your job locations, try to be general. Try to utilize metropolitan areas or, just general city terms as much as possible, unless there's some reason that you really want to whittle that down. And then on the right, you'll see that it has a button you can click that says, I'm open to remote work. Make sure you've planned that out, right? Like we talked about. Make sure you know whether or not you are open to remote work before you make a decision on that. Your start date, immediate, flexible, whatever it is, make a decision on that one. Do you want full-time? Do you want contract? Do you want part-time, etc.? And then when you add that to your profile, then your profile will become visible to recruiters who are casting out a net, if you will. And if your credentials fall into what they're looking for in that net, then you'll go into their visibility once they do their searches. Sorry, my button didn't go. And so before you do that, again, let's make sure that you have all these other little things checked off. So make sure you're adding your skills. This is where you add your skills on the top left here, that photo. So it'll say to you, okay, well, based on your profile, here are some skills we think you might have. don't check them unless you have them. And then when you start to add your skills, be mindful of the little drop downs that come up, because if it's something that you can see someone else has had already, if it's something that's like preset in LinkedIn, there's a better chance that a recruiter will pick that up, as opposed to if you vary the spelling, or if you change the capitalization, or if you use like a more colloquial term for something as opposed to the technical term. So make sure that you're checking there and seeing if that's a legitimate skill or if you're just writing it in. Licenses and certifications. Always add all your licenses and certifications. Make sure that all of that stuff is up to date and complete, because a lot of that stuff is also criteria by which the recruiters will search. And last but not least, make sure you list accomplishments. If you have honors, if you have awards, if you have publications, if you have any kind of organizational affiliations, things like that are great to add onto your LinkedIn page as well. And with that, I will take it back to you, Marcus, so that you can start doing your questions.
All right, awesome. So one of the questions, and this is just about the webinars in general that I've gotten a lot of, were if you can share these webinars with either patrons, other friends that maybe you think it would be helpful for, you are more than welcome to share them. The recordings, again, are all on YouTube, so you can just grab those links and send them over. And in the email follow-up, there are links to all the webinars as well as the slides, so definitely feel free to share those. But now, so Rachel, there have been a couple of questions, um, let's see, about virtual interviews and like what are some of your top tips for preparing and kind of executing a virtual interview?
That's a wonderful question, because as we've discussed, doing online virtual interviews have become really standard. And I'll tell you, there's different types. So I love to expound on this, because there's actually several different ways that you can do a virtual interview. There are some companies whose virtual interview process encompasses pre-recorded questions. And that's something that you really want to take the time to be prepared for. So they'll give you the list of questions in advance, and then they'll also give you the opportunity, usually, to view and then edit or redo your answers before you submit them. But what they do is basically give you a question, and this is literally you're interviewing without an interviewer present. So they'll give you a question and it'll say, okay, this is the question that we're asking you, and you have 1 minute to answer. And what the expectation is that you will record this 1 minute, or sometimes they don't give you a time cap, or whatever length answer to that question in a video, which is, you know, in a couple of ways, maybe a little bit more relaxing because you're not face to face with a person. But then there is also the pressure of creating an effective recording that they're going to want to watch start to finish. So there's that type. And then there's the meeting space, online meeting space type of interview as well. So no matter what type you're doing, my number one recommendation is think about your backdrop very carefully before you select a location. So let's say you have a home office, and in your home office behind your desk there's some very elaborate piece of art, or a poster from a concert that you saw 10 years ago, or pictures of your family and your kids and stuff. Just, again, be mindful of what that says about you, and of how distracting it is to the eye of the person looking at you. Because if there's one thing that's different about online virtual interviews and in-person in office interviews, it's that the tendency of the interviewer to become distracted is increased, because they're looking at something unfamiliar. They're not in their office in the room where they've conducted dozens of interviews in the past in their career. They're now in your home, right? And so you want to make sure that whatever backdrop you have is just as plain as possible. And when I say as plain as possible, I'm talking like if you can facilitate just a white wall with nothing on it, that's outstanding. Give them absolutely nothing to look at, and like don't have a pile of laundry behind you. Don't have dishes piled up in the sink behind you. Don't be in the bathroom. I know that that sounds ridiculous, but I have had interviewers tell me that they've gone to interviews and had a student be in the bathroom. So it's just, you really just want to be mindful of your background. The next thing that I would say, the next step is, once you've got your location down, make sure you have solid internet connection there. So if you're running on Wi-Fi and the place where you want to do your interview happens to be across the house or on the other side of a cement wall, or if there's some kind of interference of any type with your connectivity, or if you're hardline and the hardline doesn't go that far, that's something you want to resolve before the interview too. So not only do you need the right location, but you need to ensure that you're going to have a good, solid connection in that spot. And I would recommend going so far as to setting up a Zoom meeting with a friend or a coworker or a family member, and just running through like a little mock interview. And when I say mock interview, I don't mean that you have to go through questions and answers. You don't have to practice the interview at all. I would just recommend sitting in that spot for 15 or 20 minutes, having a conversation, and ensuring that the quality of the video and the quality of the audio in the spot that you're sitting is what you want it to be. And the best way to do that is to do a dry run with somebody. And then, last but not least, I would say get yourself a really great professional outfit picked out and pretend like you're leaving the house. So if you would go in slacks and a button down shirt and some nice dress shoes, then that's what you should wear to your online interview. Because even in the home, even outside of the office, even in regular situations, when you're dressed in that manner, subconsciously, your tendencies will lean more toward professional than to casual. Your body will just naturally hold itself differently. Your posture will improve. The way you speak will start to be a little bit more professional. If you are, as many of us are, the kind of person who might casually drop like some mild profanity while you're talking to your friends, but you know not to do that at work, then being in work clothes will help you to not have to think about that, right? And not distract you from being able to give effective answers to the questions. So those are my top things. Just location, connection, and appearance. Those are going to be your number one tips. And then all the other details, I would say just be mindful of your hairstyle. I know that that sounds a little bit nitpicky, but it really is actually a subconscious bias that people have, like something very plain, very, if you have long hair, whether you're a guy or a girl, if you have long hair, try to do something very muted as far as hairstyle. If your hair is like a wacky color, you might want to temporarily go back to a natural hair color before an interview, even if you plan on reverting right back once you're hired. But just for the interview purpose itself, it might help to just not stand out in that way. If you have a lot of facial piercings or a lot of ear piercings, even if you have just ear piercings but you have 6 or 7 holes in one ear, I recommend taking those out. If you're heavily tattooed, I recommend long sleeves. And again, these are things that kind of give us a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction when we think like, well, why should I cover up who I am? And that's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm asking you to do is to reserve that for after you've been hired. So don't give the interviewer any opportunity to judge you based on your appearance, essentially.
We actually got a great question kind of continuing on the interview topic. How do you handle your nerves, or if the interviewer asks a question that you don't have an answer for, you can't think of one off the top of your head?
Those are great questions. And I'll tell you, having taken a lot of courses over the course of the years and having done a lot of presentations, public speaking is a very nerve wracking endeavor. And being on an interview is almost exactly the same as public speaking, the experience. So if you read the psychological experience that people have when they're engaging in a public speaking event and then mirror it against when they're engaging in an interview, they are not dissimilar at all. They have a lot in common. So one of the things that happens is that your cortisol levels will actually jump up. What is cortisol? Cortisol is your stress hormone. And this is going to sound ridiculous, but it really is. I promise you, there is psychology behind it. The best practice is to be mindful of your posture and to engage in a superhero pose exercise prior to the interview. I know it sounds crazy, but your body posture can affect your cortisol levels and it can affect your nerves. So, just standing with your hands on your hips and your chest out and your head up for 30 seconds before you sit down for your interview remarkably soothes your nerves. It is surprisingly effective in helping you to kind of get yourself settled. And then when you're sitting in the interview, sit straight up as you can, because again, the interviewer notices that as well, and that's online or in person. And then try to keep your hands separated and on your thighs. So you're imagine yourself, and you can practice it right now while I'm telling you. Sit straight up with your back up against a chair with a back. And that's another thing that I forgot to mention. I recommend having a chair with a back because it'll prevent slouching. So sit there, put your back up against the back of the chair and put your hands on your thighs. And keep your legs uncrossed and unfolded. You know, you can keep them together, but just uncrossed and unfolded in any way. This position is a highly effective interview position because it gives your body circulatory room to breathe. If you're folded up, if you're crossed, if you're in any way kind of crunched up, not only is it going to impede your body's circulation, but it also changes your mindset. So that's a really effective way of dealing with nerves. The other thing that I would say is to deep breathe the entire time. Breathe deeply. And even if you have the answer to the question prepared and at your fingertips, before you answer any question, take a breath. Not an audible heavy sigh, but just take a deep breath to calm your nerves, because if you're like me, when you're nervous, it's audible. If you ever see me in a position where I'm slightly nervous, my voice will kind of sound higher pitched, it'll sound thinner, it might even shake a little bit, and that's everybody. Anybody who's nervous is going to be affected in that way. So to prevent your voice from shaking and to prevent your nerves from overtaking what you're saying, a nice deep breath, like just a nice calming breath, is a wonderful way to go. And then the other thing is, have a couple of the questions prepared. There are a couple of questions that you can almost guarantee that you're going to be asked. So, one of them being, tell me about yourself, right? And we're going to practice a good, impersonal, professionally driven, tell me about yourself question. Talk about your education, talk about your previous work experience, and then talk about your short term and long term goals. And then, most importantly, it's very helpful to touch on why you've been drawn to that organization. Because again, we know that employers like to have personal touches in their applicants, right? We know they like to feel like they're your number one choice, not just one of the 50 jobs you've applied to. And so practice answering a question in that way. Practice your about me. Don't have a script in front of you, but just have it a little bit worked out to where you feel comfortable rattling it off, firing off when prompted. I would say practice the why do you want to work here question, and the why do you think that you'd be the best candidate for the job, because these are all really common interview questions. And then as far as questions that you don't have the answer to, it is 100% okay to say, I don't know. They're not going to judge you for that. If it's like a quiz question, and they say to you, can you tell me what section 5.39 of the penal code is, and you're, applying for a position as a legal aid. um, you can say, you know what, honestly, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can tell you what I would do to go about getting the information. And then that's when you show them that you are resourceful, that you're not scared off by something that you don't know, that you're not afraid to learn new information. So saying I don't know is actually arguably a really powerful tool in an interview.
Just to kind of chime in regarding the taking deep breaths, one of the things that I found I do a lot when I'm nervous is I'll just stop breathing. So halfway through a sentence, like my voice kind of goes out and it's like, all right, that doesn't really sound very professional. So definitely keep
Hmm.
keep remembering to breathe in, breathe out, pause in a sentence if you need to take a quick breath, something like that would definitely help. Because kind
Yes,
of
don't
once you
forget
get
to
in your
breathe.
head, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Um,
Hmm.
so we do have a question. It's a bit more specific, but if you have kind of a visible issue or like something like Parkinson's disease where you have body tremors, should you explain from the outset that you're not nervous, but your shaking is due to Parkinson's? Or kind of how would you address that?
That's a really wonderful question. And the thing that I would consider prior to making an upfront disclosure about that is whether or not you've listed it as a disability on your application. You have to be very careful when it comes to things like that. So, equal opportunity laws legally prevent employers from utilizing any bias or any filtering methods based on a disability or based on a physical condition. So if it's something that would require disclosure and you haven't disclosed, then make sure that you explain why. Because, and again, if it's something that requires disclosure, just disclose it. The best thing to always do is to be honest, right? If it's something like Parkinson's that probably doesn't require disclosure, then I absolutely don't think that it would hurt at all to just say it up front. Introduce yourself. And when they say to you, okay, tell me about yourself, utilize that as an opportunity to make that disclosure, to explain the physical stuff that you have going on, and then segue right into, because of my struggles with Parkinson's, I feel like it's given me all of these great skills and soft skills that are applicable in this job. So I would frame that, like I would take that and use it to make you an even more desirable candidate. Like if it were me, I would sit there and they would say, okay, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I would say, well, just to let you know up front, there's going to be some physical activity going on, and this is due to the condition that I have, and it's Parkinson's. And through my medical history with Parkinson's and having to overcome all of the hurdles that I may have encountered because of that, I've picked up this, that, and the other skills, and I've found that they have been invaluably helpful in this particular field because XYZ, and this is how I apply them. That would be a really great way to incorporate that into the interview process.
Awesome. Now, kind of to transition over to resumes, one thing that you mentioned previously is not to kind of list out super long for a specific job, but how do you, if you had a bunch of responsibilities and have been there for a couple of years, how do you go about choosing and picking which is the best kind of skills to highlight and which ones you can leave off?
That's a wonderful question. And there are two things that are your best friend here. So one of them is keywords, and one of them is transferable skills. The keywords, of course, are always going to go first, right? So you're always going to include your keywords more importantly than anything else. If it's a keyword on a resume or if it's keyword on a job posting, whatever it is, make sure that those are at the top of your priority list. Then going down that list, I would select highly transferable, universally applicable skills next. So let's say, for example, you are doing a career transition and you have all of these relevant skills to your current position. And out of the list of, say, 20, 10 of them are highly transferable and applicable to any field, particularly the one for which you're applying. And so I would prioritize the skills in that way. Make sure that you're selecting the ones that are able to be transferred, that are really relevant. And then the other thing is, and this is just a weird idiosyncrasy of the working world, sometimes what we would break down in common use language into like 5 or 6 skills can actually be summarized by one category of skills. The example that I'm going to give you is Microsoft Office Suite. Microsoft Office Suite is one thing, right, that you would put on your resume. And yet, people tend instead to put Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, Word, OneNote, and they just go down that list of Microsoft products in which Outlook, I'm proficient in all of these things. When in reality, you could summarize that entire grouping of skills into I am proficient in all Microsoft Office Suite products. And so sometimes we're tempted to list down all the sub tasks, all of these individual skills and individual responsibilities because they're very important on a day-to-day basis in our job, and then they become intrinsically important to us because of that. But in reality, they can be grouped together. I know that the technical example is hard to maybe sometimes carry over, but another example that I would give you would be for accounting. And sometimes I fall back on that quite often because I did accounting for several years. And so for accounting, I could tell you that I am proficient in, accounts payable and in accounts receivable and in, credit card reconciliation. Or I could tell you that I am QuickBooks proficient and all introductory accounting tasks proficient. I'm probably saying that incorrectly right now off the top of my head, but in other words, like these are task groupings that don't necessarily have to be laid out itemized. It's not always necessary to do an itemized list. And sometimes it's actually more effective to show that you are completely versed in a full spectrum of one area of skills.
All right, and if you could just quickly kind of go over how long a resume should be, is like 2 pages the limit, or kind of what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that 2 pages should be the limit really like 90% of the time. I I very, very, very infrequently like to make a 3-page resume. Certainly not a 4 or 5 page resume. I can tell you, and this is really like, and I don't mean to make the employer sound lazy or mean or cutthroat, but I don't know a lot of employers who would pull out a 5 or 6 page resume and go, oh yeah, let me read through this whole thing. And again, remember that even if you make it through the ATS scan, which may or may not have a page limitation, you still have to make it through that employer too. And that might be a thing for them. They might not have the time or the inclination to go through more than 2 pages. I would say if you absolutely feel like you can't limit yourself to 2 pages, for sure don't go past 3. And then, my page rule is always if you don't go all the way to the halfway point, then you probably don't need that next page. So, in other words, if you've got a 3-page resume, but the third page is like a third of the page or even a quarter of the page, I promise you, you can turn that into a 2-page resume. Play with the margins, play with the spacing, play with the consolidation of terms, shorten your bullets a little bit, utilize 2 columns for your skills and qualifications instead of one. There's things that you can do that can make your resume formatting effective and yet more consolidated.
And then, what do you suggest? Do you prefer a summary description or bulleted items at the top of the resume? And what do you see has like the best effect?
Both. I like both. And that's a I guess more of maybe a style preference for me. I will tell you the expectation is that most resumes have a little bit of a summary at the top now. Once upon a time, and when I say once upon a time, I mean maybe about 10, as recently as within the last 10 years, it was the the standard was to have an objective statement at the top of your resume. And for a very long time, the expectation was that at the very top of your resume, you would put your objective, and it would say, seeking an entry level position at this business firm to hopefully achieve director of marketing one day, or whatever, whatever your objective was. And that's no longer desirable. That's gone the way of the paper resume. That is no longer the standard. But the summary has become very popular, and it has become kind of the expectation. So I would definitely, if you feel the need to pick one or the other, I would go with a 3 or 4 line summary. I would always include a resume title unless you really absolutely don't feel like you have one that you'd want to put at the top there. And then for me personally, I really love to put underneath my summaries, I like to put some bullets, and that's where I'll do 2 or 3 columns for those bullets so that they don't look like a long list beneath. And so maybe 9 tops. So let's say you've got 9 little keywords, skills, and qualifications that you want to list directly below your summary, and you'll put 3, 3, and 3 in a 3 column. Actually, let me show you. Hold on. I think I have just that. There you go. So this is my favorite style. And of course you have to vary it. I'm not going to give the same resume to every client, but this is what I really like. I like to have a position title followed by 3 to 4 sentences and then some bullets, but don't do like I would never ever ever do more than 3 bullets down in any block anywhere on your resume. If you're going to exceed 3 bullets, then utilize 2 columns or even 3 columns to make it look nice and clean. You never want to have that effect of like this is a laundry list on your resume. And then if at all possible, try to have even columns because it's just more visually clean.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how far back you should be putting on a resume? And then also kind of in that topic, what's the max amount of positions that you should have on your resume?
This is okay, that's a really great question. And this is there's sometimes conflicting guidance on this, right? So if I were to tell you, I don't think that you should put more than 4 jobs on your resume, that's usually what I lean toward, 4 to 5 positions max. But sometimes for some people, that doesn't go back far enough, right? Like 5 jobs sometimes is only 5 years, and they've been working for much longer than that. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes, they've been in the field for 20 years, but they've had the same position for 25. So it looks like that's the only job they've ever done. This is where you want to get a little bit creative. So I always say 15 years should be your goal, right? You really don't want to go back more than 15 years. There's a couple of reasons for this. It's partially to avoid ageism because very often the employers will go, "Oh, you've been working in the field for 40 years. Like, how old are you? Or what do you still know about what's relevant? Or, what are you doing coming on board here at an entry level position?" There's an element of bias that can be introduced. The other thing is, and going back to that relevant skills, the currency of your skill set. Because not that you can't prove that you have current relevant skills, but in reality, the things that we did in any industry, in any field 25 years ago are not the things that we do today for the most part. So a lot of that information can be just unnecessary baggage to bring to your resume and to lengthen it unnecessarily. So really that 15-year mark, sometimes I extend to 20, sometimes I only go back 10. these are the things like that's that, but that's your happy area, right? That's your happy place. 15 years plus or minus 5, say. And then what you'll do is you'll make that determination based on what your work history looks like. So if you've had, and this isn't a judgment, but if you've had 10 jobs in as many years, you probably don't want to put all 10 jobs on there. And so your resume may only go back to 5 years. The thing that I would say to take a look at to try to see if you can accomplish is, can you group some of the other 5 positions that we're leaving off into one category? So let's say, for example, you've had 10 jobs, but 5 of them were administrative assistant positions. And you put your 5 previous positions. And then at the bottom in a little summary, you say additional experience as an administrative assistant from, and then you put the years from this year to this year. You don't have to say I was an administrative assistant at 5 firms. You can just say I was an administrative assistant for these 5 years. If they want more background than that, they'll ask for it. But for the interest of keeping your resume looking the way you want it and getting through the ATS scan, I would leave that information off. And another thing that I tell people, and this is people who work as independent contractors, people who freelance, or people who have done a lot of contract work, because contract work can be dangerous. Contract work is justifiably short in term, right? Because you get a year contract. And so maybe you've been working as a marketing executive for 10 years, but you've had 10 jobs because you've taken on 10 one-year contracts. And you weren't let go, you didn't quit. That's just the duration of those contracts. My recommendation there is to put, just like as if you were at the position for 10 years, put marketing independent contractor as your header, as your position block. And then say, over the last 10 years in your little summary, I've taken multiple Fortune 500 contracts as a marketing executive, and I come in and I do these contract jobs and blah, blah, blah. And then beneath that, as if they were different positions within that same time frame, you would say, this was the job that I did for Macy's, and this was the job that I did for H&R Block, and this is the job that I did for Abraham and Strauss. I know they're out of business, but but so those are the ways that you can kind of play around with that to show all of those positions, but without it looking like you have all those multiple short-term employment stints.
Awesome. So, kind of in a similar vein, but moving on to actually applying to places. If you're moving and you're moving a state, what's the best way to find local jobs or to just find positions in your area that maybe you haven't been in for very long?
That's a wonderful question also. If you're it depends if you're moving and staying within your field, or if you're moving and doing a career transition simultaneously. So those are two completely different levels of transformation, of transition to make. If you're moving and staying in field, then the first thing you should do is change your location on LinkedIn. And then the second thing that you should do is go to that city's .gov website. I'll give you Texas as an example because I live in Texas. Texas has a Texas state website, and then there's also individual city websites. And on the city websites, they have job forum consolidation. What do I mean by that? I mean, they will pull, they in order to attract people to move, right? They will pull all the information for all the available jobs in that area, and they'll list it on their website, on the city website. So very often that's a great place. And then in particular, all of the government jobs, city jobs, state jobs, anything of that nature will be on there as well. And so it's a great place to do a little bit of research on the jobs that are available in the area. Then I would suggest going one step further than that and actually looking up each individual organization, getting some reviews like Google reviews or Glassdoor.com reviews. Again, go back to your cost of living calculator. Go to your cost of living calculator, find out what salary you're going to need to make in this new location that you're moving to, and then check out that company and see if you can get some general salary information, see if they're competitive within that amount, within that salary bracket. And another thing that you can do is you can join some of the forums that are not necessarily professional networking forums, but they're incredibly friendly and open and might lead to making some really great contacts. There are websites like nextdoor.com and neighborhood. And when you go on those, you can set up a profile based on your intended place of residence and say, put a posting up and say, hey guys, I'm relocating to the area. This is my field. Anybody on here with experience, or does anybody know anybody? Could anyone help me with some networking in that regard? There are just so many resources out there to get in touch with people online from a distance. And then again, but keeping in mind, even though it's on maybe nextdoor.com or Facebook or wherever you're going to make these contacts, if it's with professional intentions, keep all the communications professional.
Speaking of professional, you do have on the resume up on the screen right now, you have circled professional.email@gmail.com. Can you explain a bit more what counts as a professional email and what would not be acceptable at all to have on your resume?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. First name, last name, at whatever. First initial, last name at whatever, last name, first name dot last name. All of these combinations of your name would be considered professional. Nothing else really falls into that category. So I would 100% stay away from nicknames, hobbies, sports, team names, dates of birth, years of graduation from college or from high school, anything that could be misconstrued as a giveaway of your age or of your location. Some people are inclined to sometimes put a zip code. Don't do that. Don't put your zip code. You want to keep it as completely normal as possible. So if my resume says Rachel Eckman at the top, ideally my email is going to say Rachel Eckman at whatever at the bottom. And that is a true amount on the right there, where it says over 75% of resumes are rejected because of an unprofessional email address. That happens to be of just tens of thousands of employers surveyed. 3/4 of them have stated that they'll toss a resume. Like if they're going through a stack of resumes and they need to whittle it down, that is one of the number one criteria that they'll use. They'll toss all the unprofessional email addresses, particularly if it's one that could be construed as inappropriate.
Thank you. That's super important and always good to keep in mind. So don't really use your personal email address necessarily up there. It might be smart to create a brand new one, correct?
That is the best idea, honestly, and that is what I have done in the past. Create an email address that is dedicated to your job search. That's not absolutely the best way to go about it.
All right, we have an interesting question that asks, what do you do or what can you do if you find a job position or a company that you would really like to work for, but they already list the salary range and you know that that would be too low? Is there anything you can actually do about that, or would you recommend doing anything about that?
That's a really good question. And you know, typically with a company that lists the salary range on the job posting, you can expect, regardless of your qualifications and your experience, most of the time the initial offer is going to be on the lower end of that range. It's very unusual for them to initially offer somebody the higher end of that range unless they determine that that person is absolutely must have, can't live without. But So typically, not only would the range maybe not be within your realm, but you could probably expect to be initially offered the lowest end of that range. The thing that I would recommend here is to do a budget assessment and make sure that that salary is out of your range. So again, sit down, go through your budget, look at things like, it's here somewhere. Look at things like, are you relocating? Is your commute going to change? Will your tax status change? If you move from New York to Texas, you'll go from paying at least two, if not three sets of taxes, because there's, state, city, and then sometimes even county, to paying no state taxes. So things like that should be taken into consideration when you're doing your budget and when you're factoring in your salary. Look at your luxury expenses, see if you could feasibly cut back on some of those for a couple of years. See if you can put yourself in that salary range. If you absolutely can't, or if you can't get within reason, so when I say if you can't get within reason, I mean if you can't get within a negotiable window of that salary range. If they say that the salary is between $15,000 and $25,000 and you absolutely can't live in less than 40,000, then there's nothing you can do. Honestly, I hate to say it, but you're just going to have to pass on the position. If you look at the job and it says 15 to 25,000 and right now you're at 28 and that's really where you're most comfortable, then it's absolutely worth pursuing and then having a conversation with the employer later on down the line. So you have to really kind of make that determination based on your personal needs. But I would really recommend doing a really strong calculation of whether or not that's something you really need. Is that salary absolutely non negotiable?
All right, so we have only a couple more minutes, so we'll try to get through some questions a little bit quicker. One of them is about career gaps, or if you don't have a lot of career history. And I know that this is especially prominent with kind of like recent graduates, especially if you graduated within the last year, like
Hmm.
possibly like about a year ago, and then the pandemic hit and then you couldn't find a job. How do you go about addressing that and kind of making that a little bit less of an issue?
That's a wonderful question. And I will tell you, and this is unfortunately not a positive state of information, but it's the truth. This is a very difficult time for recent grads to be job seeking. And I've read a lot of research that says that a lot of companies have actually even gone so far as to withdraw offers to recent grads that they'd previously recruited because they were facing economic uncertainty, financial uncertainty. They were in a position where it was maybe even a choice between laying people off or just not hiring these recent grads that they had planned on taking on board. So this is a difficult market for the recent grad. One of the things that I would suggest, and this is if you can afford it, if you need a job, take a gap job, right? Just take something that's going to pay the bills. But in the meantime, in the interim, if you can afford to, try to find a related internship in your field. If the company that you're looking for employment with isn't hiring or they're looking for someone with experience, but they would consider an internship, even if they don't have one advertised, it's worth a call and saying, would you consider a recent grad as an unpaid intern with the potential of employment at the end of the internship? It's something that you can actually kind of negotiate yourself in the door in that way. And then even if you can't, let's say you approach the company of your choice and you say, look, I know you're not hiring, but would you consider an internship? This is really where I want to be. I'm dedicated. I'd really love the opportunity to prove to you that I would be an asset to the organization. And they say, okay, sure. And you work as an intern for 6 weeks. And at the end of 6 weeks, they tell you, we're really sorry, but we're unable to offer you a position at that time. You've still got an employment block on your resume out of it and a reference. Because again, internships are wonderful. They're a gold mine of professional networking and references. And let's say at the end of 6 weeks, HR says, look, I'm sorry, we just really don't have it in the budget to hire anybody at this time. We're going to have to let you go. Talk to your direct supervisors whom you've impressed tremendously over the course of the last 6 weeks and say, hey, look, I was really hoping to come on board with you guys because this was my ideal job and this is the ideal organization. But do you happen to know of anyone else who might be hiring right now? That's how you've gotten yourself foot in the door in the industry, viable working experience to put on your resume, and professional networking tools and resources to maybe help you network your way into another job. So I know it's not ideal to have to do an unpaid internship, but sometimes those are a great grab for a professional networking in. And then the other thing that I would tell you is to continue with educational and professional development, even though you've already graduated. So if you're currently job seeking and you've graduated already and you're sitting there and stressing about the gap now between your school and your next job, first of all, you can always use school as an employment block on your resume. So if you don't have professional experience after school, list school as your most recent employment experience. And then the other thing that you can do is continue to engage in professional development driven activities. Get certifications, take online classes, go to seminars, go to webinars, list all of these things as continued efforts to expand and increase your professional development while you search for the right position.
And kind of on top of the gap job, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned in one of our previous webinars that it's easier to find a job when you're currently employed. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And again, fair or not fair, unfortunately, it's easier to find a position when you've got one already.
All right, so we can take two real quick questions. So we'll be real quick with this. But for someone who's a bit older, you mentioned ageism. If they're going to be continuing in the same field, how would you go and use your age as kind of like a benefit to you, even if the kind of field has changed a little bit over your time there?
So I didn't mean to use ageism as a negative, and that's a great question. Age is not a negative thing. It's just it is one type of bias that exists within the hiring community. However, if you can put at the top of your resume that you've got 10, 15, 20 years of experience in your field, that that's the opposite problem, right, that the college grads are having right now. How are they going to get a job without experience? Well, you've got all that experience, so that experience is a positive thing, 100%. And even if you don't, and it's going to sound counterintuitive, but it's not, because the ATS is more than likely not going to parse this particular sentence as a screen out factor, whereas the dates going back might be. If you've got 25 years experience in your field and you develop 15 years in your resume, you can still write in your summary block, I have 25 years of experience in the field. Because when the employer looks at it and says, wow, you have 25 years experience, tell me about it, that's when you'll expand on it. But that'll be like in the interview process. And then that's also something you can touch on in your cover letter. Talk about your experience and how it has laid the foundation for not just the timeless, always needed, you know, basic foundational fundamental skills, but that you've continued your professional development over the years to include all the latest technology and all the latest information and all the latest guidance.
All right, thank you so much for that and kind of clarifying the ageism point, because I know that that can kind of be a worry for a lot of people, especially since
Absolutely.
a lot of people have been thrown into the job market as of late. So I really appreciate that. It looks like that's actually all the time that we have for today, but I really appreciate everybody joining and asking all of these great questions. And just before we go, just a reminder, all of these recordings are available on our YouTube channel. So definitely take a look at that if you ever want to catch up or take a look or kind of refresh on some of the content that we covered. Um, Otherwise, definitely keep an eye out, join all of our socials and follow our socials because we will be posting about some other webinar series that we have coming up in the new year. And that we're working hard on getting set up. So definitely keep an eye out on that. Rachel, is there anything else that you'd like to kind of mention as your final point?
I just want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I really do hope that we've given you some really great feedback and some really great information. And I wish you all the absolute best of luck on your job searches, and use the PowerPoints and use the resources. And I know that you'll accomplish all of your goals.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining and have a wonderful weekend.